welcome to the Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. I'm Christina, Caro, clinical psychologist, and this is my partner, Karen Lee Lynskey, executive leadership and self-trust coach. We want to thank everybody who has shared and liked our channel because that is helping us get this out to more and more people. So Karen, hello, welcome back.
Well, I'm so excited to be back, and we have this new camera set up for me, so I got a new computer, so hopefully this will be A-okay, A plus, I should say, as my dad would want me to get grade-wise, but just joking there. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. What are we gonna?
Yeah, and folks, I don't know if you're picking this up, but my dog is outside this door just crying and trying to get in. So if you hear any whining in the background, that is my poor dog, Sophie. So today we are having a conversation about the human experience of struggling to ask for what we need. Like just like my dog Sophie, she is trying to ask for what she needs right now. She wants to be with her mama.
This is kind of perfect.
I don't know if y'all can hear that. She's a hound. She's a hound dog.
Perfect, actually.
We're going to be exploring how the challenge of asking for our needs affects us both personally and also in professional relationships. We're hoping to share some common experiences of relying on habits of expecting mind reading or how certain behavior patterns that we do to protect ourselves end up leading to resentment. But we also want to bring some insight into how do we get here? Why do we have these fear stories? And then how can we practice some self-curiosity as well as cultivate courage and really understand this concept and the act of asking for needs is really about rigorous honesty with ourselves and with the people around us.
I am so excited to share this because I honestly do believe that when I learned this, it really made life so much more simpler. And I wasn't as frustrated with life generically when I have conversations. So, but as you know what I'm going to say, but before we start, can you please help us out and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit share, hit those notification buttons so you know when our next episode is coming. And for you podcast listeners, we'd like you to hit the text us link in the show notes with your comments and questions. And if you can leave a comment, 7 words or more, that will help us with our algorithm to recognize meaningful engagement. So even if you just leave a comment that says something like, I made it to the very end, those 7 words actually will really help us get our channel to more people. That's Christina, the researcher. I would not have known that. Now, so let's get right into the episode. Christina, it's very interesting how we started. So tell me why this topic is so critical to mental health these days, whether you're in a professional or a personal environment.
Well, I think what catalyzed us to talk about this is we had just done an episode, and we'll put a link in the bottom called the Johari window. Mm-hmm. And it's looking at these different states. Either we're open, we have a blind spot, we have a hidden area, and we have the unknown. Then we started talking about needs, how a lot of the time we have needs and we're uncomfortable expressing them. And this comes up a lot as a psychotherapist with clients who have some prohibitions about asking for needs. And it does affect our personal relationships because it can result in stress. It can result in increasing despair and depression. It often is the fuel for resentment and ultimately can result in damaged relationships. So these patterns, they really begin as early as childhood and even in infancies. Really, the patterns that we learned to try to deal with our environment, our situation, often end up carrying forward into our adult life. And so we don't even know that we're engaging in fear-based survival strategies around needs. So having this conversation was to bring this to awareness so you can start being curious about yourself, asking yourself, how does this affect my relationships? What is my comfort level? Do I feel uncomfortable when I think about needs? Do I have a taboo in my head saying, oh, you're going to be needy, you'll be seen as needy, so you better keep that under wraps, right? Because I know that's certainly a message I've gotten in my lifetime. Go
Especially in
ahead.
the professional in the setting, especially, like, there's these quote, unquote, "rules." I don't wanna seem needy, but, that's
Mm.
part of the problem. Are you really being seen as needy, right? So sorry to interrupt. I gotta
Yeah,
stop.
no.
So you
Well, I don't think it's just like a fear being seen that way. I know particularly women, but I know some men experience this too, where they're told they're being needy.
Yeah.
You may be with a partner who doesn't really have your best intentions at heart, and really they're a little narcissistic, or they're all about themselves. And so when you try to convey a need, their first response is like, "Oh, you're being needy." And that's a manipulation to keep you from advocating for yourself, so that person becomes the center of the universe. And so that's a whole nother big topic about being in a
We'll have to
manipulative
hit that later.
relationship. But really, when we're talking about maybe you're more in a healthy relationship, but this is a sticking point for you, we want to help you see that the work helps you bring more freedom, because you're taking responsibility for your own needs. And really, as adults, we're not infants. We're not dependent on our mother or our parents. So it's really important that we understand that this is something we have to cultivate. We have to learn. It is a skill. It's one of the foundational skills that I work with clients on. And hopefully, this will be the beginning of the journey for you.
So what I want to go into now is understanding the fear that Christina just talked about, and that whole fear of asking. Because really, if you think about it, why do we fear so much? And remember, we had talked earlier about that fear of not belonging anymore, being kicked out of that tribe because of something you did. Because remember, our ancestors, quote unquote, the cavemen, really relied on group acceptance because that was how they had survival, how they kept safe. And our modern brain, as we've said in other episodes, really treats social rejection as a survival threat. So what's interesting too is the response of the brain, whether it be physical or social pain, is exactly the same. So Christine, can you talk a little bit more about that too?
Yeah, it was really cool. There's a study that came out, and now we have something called functional magnetic resonance imaging. So maybe a lot of people have had an MRI done, but a fMRI actually shows us what's firing off in the brain
Mhm.
as you're thinking about things. And what they finally saw, which any of us could have told you, is that the pain receptors in the brain
Uh-huh.
go off similarly, regardless. If it's physical pain, it lights up in a certain way. If it's emotional pain, same receptors light up. I
That's
mean, really,
also,
honestly, any of us
I
could have said,
know.
any of us
And
could have told you.
when you told me that, I'm like, I just never thought about it. It makes so much sense because the deepness of the pain that hurt doesn't matter whether I sprained my ankle or that emotional wonder. Like some of that emotional is such a big hit that sometimes I think it's worse than my ribs being hurt. Because I had a broken cartilage in my rib area. And I'm like, but sometimes my emotional pain is like, I felt as though so much deeper. It almost makes me want to grab my heart because it really hurts so badly, and I'm not even having a physical heart attack, right? So that's great. Right.
Right. You didn't need an fMRI looking at your brain.
And I think that's the whole point of this paradox. We expect others to guess our need. I do this a lot. My husband's like, or even at work, I want you to know. You should know. You know me so well. We've been married for 33 years. You tell me you don't know that I need you to do X. Oh my gosh. But yes, he doesn't always know. And it's important that we realize that. And I think it's both like at work or wherever. We just expect people to mind read us, mainly because I feel like they know me. I know they know me, so they should be able to pick up or pick up on my social cues or something.
I don't think people go into it thinking, I expect my partner to read my mind. It's not as much as that. It's more about attentiveness. And
Oh, that
then
makes a lot of sense.
the feeling, the why it hurts is because then it feels like, well, if you have been attentive, and if we're attached and you're my partner, then you would be learning about me over time. And, we talked a little bit about brain processing styles. And
Mhm.
remember, there are those brains that are past, present, future, or they can go to the past and be like, oh, I know this from the past. But there are a good number of brains that are just in the moment.
Mm.
And they might not be as wired to connecting
Yeah.
those dots.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can see how some of this all intersects. context, but I do think it gets related to attentiveness. And again, it goes back to those instincts when we were infants, that when we were hungry,
You would cry.
someone came and we cried, we picked us up, and then suddenly we weren't hungry anymore.
So true.
So those memories imprint over time that, I have a feeling, I have a need, and suddenly it's met. And this is what I meant when I said we start learning these patterns of
Mm.
expectations really from infancy. Now, we should unlearn some of them as we become adults and we realize people can't read our minds. It's like I said, we're not infants anymore. We can articulate our needs. And I think there is that false belief that if you love me, then I shouldn't have to express my needs. And
Yeah.
I would say it's more, if you're an adult, you're probably going to have to communicate your needs.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was watching a podcast on cues. Sometimes I thought, if you know my hand goes this way, you would have known that I'd be really pissed off at you. But in actuality, I might be, so it's just interesting about some of the cues that I would assume that he would pick up now after all this amount of time, or the words I use or something.
That's the problem with irregular reinforcement. So this is how a slot machine works, folks. Slot machines work because sometimes you win. Not consistently, not
I
all the
love
time,
that.
but
I love that.
intermittently it is rewarded.
Yeah.
So if cues are sometimes recognized or needs are sometimes inferred, but it's intermittent, it actually reinforces the behavior of expecting mind reading, just the way a slot machine reinforces the behavior of
That is
continuing to
so
go.
oh, yeah. Because I
Isn't that
got it
wild?
once, so he must be trained.
Right. So it might happen again.
Yeah, right.
So important to understand this aspect of intermittent reward systems and what it does to us and how it affects the way we learn.
That's so
So
cool.
I would say if you're operating from that and you happen to notice that you think a need should be inferred and it's not happening, to recognize that and say, oh, I am going to have to be more explicit about this. And then this kind of leads us to our next section, which is really about we have to first recognize and then validate our
Mhm,
needs.
mhm, and sometimes that's hard.
Yeah. Now I was wondering, Karen, in your own experience, would you, if you were to grade yourself, like I know you don't like grades, but A, B, C, D, in terms of recognizing
I
you
don't
have a need and then validating it, like where are you?
I think right now, yeah, I'm at a B plus. I think
Mm,
because I'm
that's really
learning how
good.
to do inquiry. So I think that's because we talk a lot in here about inquiry. And that to me is being able to acknowledge my needs and not get upset about it. Like before, I'd probably be a D or like an F because I'm so self-sacrificing. I'm a people
Mhm.
pleaser. I mean, when I was a people pleaser and some other things, like I really don't feel like I didn't even know what my needs were. Honestly, that I couldn't even identify what do I need. I wouldn't know my need until I realized it didn't happen, and then I get pissed off that it didn't happen. Now I think with the ink, does that make any sense what I just said? Because
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that's really common.
yeah, and now I think it's because I realize and I have to share my need to make it explicit because I have to own my own voice now. And I think that's what I'm saying
Mm.
I feel like I'm at a B. I'm not an A yet, but I'm so much better than before because I can recognize my need and express it. And so that's what I'm very proud of because that's part of the imposter syndrome. I think like fraud, and I go, and I don't want to get kicked out of the tribe. It's all about belonging, and I don't want to like get an F and get kicked out of the tribe, which is being fired and homeless. I've told you my story, guys, before. But that's where I get. And so that's why it's really important that we did this segment also on the power of self validation. So, talk a little bit more about that, the difference between acknowledging needs and judging them.
Well, the first part is that awareness and that insight, and then acknowledging that you even have a need.
Yeah, that's a hard one
But
for
what
some people.
really quick though after that is judgment. There are some of us who, even if we get through that first step of acknowledging we have a need, we may have something come in immediately that judges whether or not it's valid.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
We haven't learned to
True.
self validate. And then the first thing that comes to our head is like, oh, well, I'm selfish if I have that need, or I'm being needy. Again, we probably learned that from someplace. We
Mhm.
probably learned it either because we were told it or it's just part of the social culture. There's some cultures say where there's stoicism is really high. You may not be able to avoid the judgment that having a need is selfish or it is being needy. So we have to learn to recognize if those judgments come in, and that it's not the same of the first step, which is just acknowledging the presence of a need.
Yeah, and I also think, as a Christian, I think I
Mhm.
struggled also with feeling selfish because a Christian, you shouldn't be selfish and you should be more selfless. LESS. But that's what I was like. It was like the golden rule. I also talked out earlier about feeling the need to stimulate. And so there's that whole thing about don't share your needs, don't share your needs, right? Assimilate. That's most important. But just stay in the
Yeah.
dry, stay dry, don't ever, so I think that is
And I,
just
I
part.
talk to clients about the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is grounded in self validation, because the platinum rule is do unto yourself as you would have others do unto you. So if you want respect, you need to respect yourself first. If
Yeah.
you want to be prioritized, you have to learn, what does that mean to myself? Am I prioritizing my own needs, my own values? Do I do that well? And then if you are good at that, you will tend to attract people around you who will be respecting in that way. So the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I just find that, so say you want kindness, you're kind to others, then others go, great, good for me. They don't necessarily reciprocate. We should do a whole episode on reciprocity. So
That's
let's
good.
talk a little bit about, okay, so we have the judgment, selfish versus self hyphen ish, to be more aligned with the self, or being needy versus having needs. That's a
I
distinction.
love that
And then
distinction.
yes, it's having needs. And then once you recognize and honor your own experience, then it's bringing in your knowledge on boundaries that we've talked about, because you have to first recognize what's okay, what's not okay. We say in boundaries, and in this case, recognize what the need is, identify what's in your control, and identify what action you're willing to take to
Mhm.
address that need.
Yep.
So it's
Okay.
very, very similar to boundaries. So let's talk about what happens, though. We've touched on it a little bit, when instead of doing that self validation, we depend instead on external validation.
So, what do you think is the key part of this external validation? Because what's interesting to me is all about the trap of seeking permission to have needs, right? Is that the whole point of why you want external validation?
Oh, that's a really good point. I do believe that when we're seeking external validation, wow, I love that. It is a kind of permission seeking. I'm okay and I won't be thrown out of the cave
Mhm.
if I get that need validated externally. Yeah, I think you're onto something there. Okay, so then another aspect of this, in addition to understanding this validation and dependency,
Mhm.
when we're doing that, we're generally ignoring our inner compass. So, to overcome this, we need to tune back into our inner compass. You absolutely have to be able to do that in order to self validate. So, in the beginning, when we introduced this episode, I mentioned that one of the strategies to cultivate to get better at this is self curiosity. Self curiosity means I'm doing an inquiry or a self search inquiry. I'm turning that inquiry inward. And then I'm trying to feel into, where do I experience this need in my body? How does this need align with my values? What does this mean to me? So I'm looking inward and I'm trying to reach into that inner compass to say, is this valid? And then if it's valid, what actions am I willing to take? And we do have to go through that validation process, because I'm not actually suggesting that every need that crosses your brain
You should say.
is necessarily right. It's like there's a difference
Yeah.
between needs and wants,
Yeah,
and being
exactly.
able to make that,
That to
like,
me is where
I
your inner
really need
yeah,
to have
yeah, exactly.
that Gucci bag or
Yep.
whatever. So there is some discernment and there is some judgment, and that's going inward. What are my values? Is this meaningful? Is this truly something that is going to have this positive effect on my life and who I am as a person? or my relationships or the goals that I'm trying to get to. You can see, like, if you kind of run through this, okay, maybe having that Gucci bag isn't going to meet the criteria, but you have to go through some sort of discernment process within yourself. If you recognize that we're trying to move away from being completely dependent outside of us, then we have to learn how to be honest with ourselves and have some discipline within ourselves to really start to sort out what's needs and what are wants.
And that actually takes time. It's not something that you can easily just get right away because I think it's just all mingled. And I think that's why going internally to have that dialogue and understand it better and take the time apart from when it happens to be able to figure that out. You know what I mean? So sometimes you say it in the moment that I want something, but sometimes you need to take a pause and really figure out. So instead of just go ahead and express the need, sometimes you have to go through this internal dialogue, like you're saying, to really figure it out. I think that happens a lot in the professional arena where it's really important because some of this self-awareness in this thing, it takes time. Like I know for me, self-awareness is something that takes time. So I get to really know myself because I never really known myself for a good 30, 40 years, I would say. And so that's what's really important, right? As you take that time. So what's interesting though is that when I talk about the professional arena, I'm doing a lot with my leadership teams that I work with and making sure that this that we're talking about expressing the needs is part of that is really to make the request very clear. It's not adamant clear, but it's being specifically about what you need because the idea is put in terms that they can understand and then they can carry out that request. So that's why it's what you need in request format, or it could be just even expressing that need first, but it's both for me.
Well, I think there's a good point here, though, is there's a difference when I think it's really important for people to recognize so that you have this need,
Mhm.
and then we move into making a request.
Mhm.
If that need requires the cooperation of somebody else,
Mhm.
then we are moving into requests. If you go back to the episode on boundaries, we talk about this. Like when you have only two legs of the stool, like there's not something that's within your own control where it's a boundary, then you're probably in request. And that is most interpersonal relationships. But where we have problems is when people feel I have a need, I've validated it, and now I'm entitled. Like you should just like there's no request part. There's no understanding that we need to ask somebody if we are needing their cooperation and then be skillful in how we make those requests because sometimes we experience needs as entitlement.
Yeah.
So Karen, how do you coach people on how to make good requests?
I think it's to realize they can't mind read what you really want because you spent the
Mhm.
time with the need and to tell them what's the request and realize that that's where the negotiate comes. So if I request that you make dinner tonight because I'm so busy, I'm making a request of you making dinner. I'm so busy that it would be great if you could make dinner. It's as simple as that because I'm telling you what I need to be done. It's not that I'm just busy. I'm telling you that I really need you to take dinner over tonight. And so that is what
Mhm.
helps. And in the business setting, it's so interesting because it's people kind of know what the request is, what they need from somebody else, but they feel like they don't want to tell them initially because they feel like they're being too demanding. And then we
Mhm.
get disappointed because this is what I was telling my executive because we get disappointed that I need you to help me with resources, but I don't want to say that because I know you're really stressed. So I make it feel like this is a request, and you forget that the person can negotiate. Well, this is what I can offer. It's like a request and then an offer. This is what I'd love to happen. Like if everything could work out perfectly, this is what I would love to happen. Is that possible? And then they would come back and they'd say, yeah, you know what? We have this extra person who she just came back. You could have her for a couple weeks. You know, she kind of gets transitioned back in. So you don't know till you ask even. But that's what I think is what they've learned is the importance of clear. And then that way realize the person can negotiate and say, I can't do that, but I can do that, which you'd rather have. Or I can't do
Mhm.
that, but you know who might be able to is Tom because I just heard XYZ. And he actually has that skill set in his unit that you may not even know that he had the skill set. And that's why I love the power of it. You taught me a lot about the importance of the I statement, because then you don't make that accusation. And so you start out
Mm.
saying things like, I would really appreciate if you could do laundry for me the next month. Or would you be willing to whatever? But I love the idea of the importance of it and let them know that, would this work out for you, right? And just know to negotiate back. How have you done it and you taught it from your with your clients and stuff? What additional would you say regarding your clients and how they
Well, I think this distinction between when you validate and you have a need or you recognize you have a need, say it's dependent on someone else's
Mhm.
cooperation, recognizing that it is a
Yeah.
request. And what happens when people feel like it's an entitlement, instead of it coming out as a request, would, hey, this is really important to me. It would mean a lot. Is this something you would be able to do? And that person has the right to say yes or no, or I can, or like you said, Karen, like maybe there's an alternative. But instead, what happens is it comes out more like an accusation.
Mm,
Like, I have this need that I am acting like I'm entitled to it, and you're not reading my mind. And so my need isn't met. And now when I communicate, it comes out as an accusation. Like, oh, so I guess you're not going to be having dinner tonight with us, like say it's a family. So instead of saying, I need you to make time to have dinner with us as a family because that's a value that I have, instead it comes out as a, well, you should have read my mind. How do you not know this? And so I'm just going to make this out. So there you go again. You're leaving the family again. You don't really care. It's all accusations. If you listen closely to accusations, you will hear an unmet need underneath it. So
interesting.
this is where curiosity can be really helpful to de-escalate a situation. But what happens is most people get defensive because they hear an attack, they hear an accusation coming towards them. And if it's like a woman and a man, oftentimes you'll get shut down on the side of the man because I'm being accused again. I don't even know what I did wrong. They're not mind reading. And you just get this breakdown in relationships. So it is really important to practice through when you're working on your boundaries and when you're working on getting your needs met, is understanding this skill around making effective requests and then negotiating how meeting that need might happen.
Mhm.
Because ultimately, we really are responsible for our needs.
Mhm.
And when I say that, I understand that we're in dynamics with people. Like, I need attention from my partner, or I need love from my partner. Like, I can't satisfy that need by myself, right? So I actually do need that from someone else. But what I mean about being responsible is that I'm responsible for knowing what it is. I'm responsible for communicating it clearly, and I'm responsible for having the boundaries. That if it's just a consistent pattern of disregard, then I have to come to the conclusion that this is not a relationship that is going to be satisfying because there's not a reciprocity of care and concern and responding to needs. And we know from research that if there isn't reciprocity and responding to needs, the relationships are not going to succeed. So
Yeah.
I think what's really important here is understanding where is that line of I've done my part of it and now I have to take in the information in terms of how is the environment responding? How is the person I'm interacting with at work or in your personal relationships? What is the response that I'm noticing? And it's not going to be perfect, by the way. I always tell people the 80-20. Hey, man, if they're showing up 80% of the time, you got to be able to deal with the other 20%.
Yeah. And I was even thinking about in like I remember I used to be because I tend to be passive aggressive and I could tell that that's the whole point of the accusation comes out passive aggressively. And I think it's very interesting because I
Oh, that's a
remember
good point. That's a good point here. But can you give an example of that? Because I don't know if everyone understands what that
well,
means.
passive aggressive is
Do you
kind of
want
like
me to give an
oh, why
example?
don't you do you I'll probably be in the ballpark and you'll be more exact. So I think it's better if you explain it.
Well, it's just those passive comments like, well, I guess we're going to be doing what you want to do this weekend.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. That's a good one.
Super
Yeah.
passive.
And the reason why I brought that up is the fact that Mark doesn't, my husband of 33 years, doesn't like to hug. And I had to make that request, because I
Mm.
said, okay, I got to make that request. And unfortunately, I have to remind him because it's not natural because he isn't very touchy feely. And so
Mm.
I just accept the fact that it's not, but then there'll be times when he really remembers, like, oh, but I had to make that request. And I was also thinking about, and you may be able to help me with some of this, but I was thinking about at work where a lot of people complain sometimes that their manager is micromanaging them. And
Mm.
the idea is that you could make a request and tell them and talk to them about this. It's not to say stop micromanaging me, but it'd be helpful.
I need more autonomy. I
Yeah,
need more autonomy.
exactly, and that's your request. So maybe what we
Mhm.
could do is I could check in with you for, like, a quick 5 minute or
Yeah.
ask for you when I need help, because that allows you to, like,
Mhm.
actually would that work for you? But that'll allow you to make that
Mhm.
request and own it instead of complaining and say, "Oh my god, she is so," because sometimes they don't even know they're micromanaging, and they don't realize that sometimes
Mhm.
that different staff need different things because Carl over there needs to be micromanaged because just of his style of working. But I don't do, but she just does it for everyone. Maybe she doesn't want to play favorite over something. But the whole point I'm trying to tell you is it's very interesting when you don't make your needs known because I think people quit before letting people know or complain about it with other people. And then it gets into this whole thing like they get this whole feedback and then it blows up, right? Instead of you just taking the time to make the request that you need, and then you're helping them. And so that's something
Mhm.
I wanted just to bring up to people.
Well,
So,
and then on the personal side, I think one of the areas that I see a lot as a therapist and working with couples is the challenge with is kind of what you brought up is, when I have male clients or I have a couple, often a man will say, well, I, have need for more intimacy. Like
mhm.
I have need for more sex and my partner is not interested. So they're dealing with rejection all the time. And they're trying to have subtle cues, the ways that they feel is flirtatious. And then their partner's like, oh, get away from me. Get away from me. It builds up into this frustration around needs. And the
Mhm.
thing is, what I hear often is men will be complaining about, we're not having sex enough. So their need, physical contact, physical intimacy, but their partner is, I don't feel emotionally connected.
Mm.
So because I don't feel that emotional connection and emotional safety, it
Mm.
just doesn't, I can't meet that need.
Yeah, like the
And
physical versus the emotional is always the struggle.
yeah, often, like, there's this God knows why we were wired this way, but this pattern where, we find that often men feel more or people who are high on touch as their love language. I don't wanna say all men or,
I'm
this
high
isn't
on
about the
touch. I
women.
know I'm high on touch.
Yeah, typically people who are high on touch as a love language, they feel connection through physical touch, through physical
Yeah,
intimacy.
that's why I need the hugs.
Right, you need a hug, but not everybody is, and maybe someone else's love language is that meaningful connection, that emotional safety.
Mhm.
So now we have a conflict of needs,
Mm, mm,
and instead of it being a negotiations or a recognition and awareness held with compassion, held with respect, and then how do we both really commit to trying to understand that person's needs and understand if I meet your need, then my need is met
mhm,
and vice versa.
mhm.
It
Instead
becomes a chicken and an egg thing.
yeah, instead I complain to my girlfriend, she's, "Man, Mark just done," and then all of a sudden I get in this cycle of, "Man, I gotta divorce that guy," because I get in this negative
Yeah,
thinking, "He doesn't understand me. Why do I
yeah.
want to stay in a relationship?" And then I go down this whole thing, and that's when I realized there was a time when I went through down because I never expressed to him what I needed, and then, I would look for other people who they would hold hands, and I'd be so jealous of them. "Why don't we be like," but we're never gonna be exactly like someone else's, but did I ever take the time to express this? Not really, like I
Yeah.
said, "Oh, I wish we would," but it did that's different than a request. What I would have
Yeah,
really
yeah, so
yeah, I really
expressing it is
appreciate
one, but
that.
that request even so this is what I see a lot is it's not even that the awareness is there, the request is there really frequently. Hey, let's go fool around, right? The request is there. It's that piece about the dependency on someone else's cooperation. That piece of
Yeah,
it
yeah,
means that there is this step that we have to go through, which is a conversation, which is a dialogue. Like, this is a need that I have, and I'm noticing that I'm not feeling the responsiveness.
yeah.
Like, is there something that is going on? Is there something that you need? Help me understand. How can we work on this together? It's much more of a conversation, but this is such an area of vulnerability. Like people feel really vulnerable around
Mm,
intimacy,
it
that
is
there's
true.
a lot of avoidance
Yeah.
around.
I
But
never
in
thought of
general, like with needs, there's a lot of avoidance. Yeah.
Never thought of that. So we're getting close on time, Christina. So I just wanted to like, what are some of the key takeaways that you would leave with our audience?
Well, we're human, so we have needs. And your needs
I love that.
your need the needs are your needs, so only you can validate them. And you have more power than you think in how you get your needs met if you start recognizing that mind reading is more likely to harm your relationship, or having an expectation of mind reading, that if you learn to self validate, you can build more confidence that you will need in having those conversations and asserting your needs. Making clear requests is going to really help you both in the work environment and your intimate relationships with your family members, your kids. I love Brene Brown has this mantra: clear is kind, unclear is unkind.
Oh, I
And
love
so
that.
learning to yeah, making clear requests and then understanding there's a negotiation step. There's a conversation step that is part of the process, because ultimately you are needing the cooperation from somebody else when it's not a need that you can satisfy yourself. But ultimately, you do have to start observing actual reality. And if you are in a situation where consistently your needs are dismissed, despite everything you've done it all right, they're dismissed, they're ignored. The person just doesn't have the capacity to really meet you
Which
where you're
happened.
asking
Yeah.
them to.
Yep.
Yeah, then ultimately it still comes down to your responsibility.
Mhm.
Do you keep going to the dry well to try to fill your bucket? Or do you say, this may not be working, this job may not work for me, or I may need to transfer to another department, or this relationship is maybe not going to serve me? Yes, it's much harder if you're married, you have kids. The next step would be making a request: I have a need that we work on this, and we go find a therapist to work on this.
Mhm.
But if you're in a dating situation, or maybe it's like a friend zone kind of thing, like I have sort of a concept of, I have my close friends like Karen, and then you picture a bullseye, and then there's like the next, maybe we're not as intimate, then there's just like activity partners, and there's friendly acquaintances. And maybe it's like, oh, this person is probably better as a friendly acquaintance, and my needs then need to reflect
That
that
relationship.
status, as opposed to, right, having an expectation of needs that I have on my inner circle. So I'm still taking responsibility for the success of getting my needs met by evaluating what is a realistic expectation given actual reality. And that's a piece that most people do not do.
And I even think in the professional realm, I think that's something that most people don't do. A lot of professional people and leaders make the assumption everybody's so busy, no one's going to have time for me. Well, how do you really know that unless you ask? Like you make a need known. It's really important that you just make clear requests of your needs for things instead of just making the assumption that they can't fulfill your needs. Guys, look, I want to thank you, and Christina, I want to thank you for just listening in. We just love doing this because it allows us to share what we're learning about in our own development about being a human. And, again, we'd love for you to share in the comments below about how you are currently struggling with this, how to make your needs known or make requests, and how you are actually maybe succeeding in validating those needs. Because, woohoo on that, because that takes time. That's not something that's easy to do. So we want to celebrate with you too. And it takes time. So guys that are beginning to understand that, it's a journey. That's why sometimes getting a coach or a therapist or asking other people and just spending some time on that will really, really help you. So until next time.
Stay curious and stay kind, everybody. We'll see you again. Bye.